Hey everyone, it's Jason Dorsey. Welcome to America's Voice on Small Business. It's our new national research. Awesome recommendations you can use right away, no matter where you're joining us from in the world. You're going to get lots of great stuff today that you can use right away. We're going to go fast, so however you like to take notes, make it happen. If you want to get out your computer, your phone, your notebook, if you're a baby boomer, grab your pen. Whatever you need, it's going to be a lot of fun. And what you'll notice at the bottom right of all the slides as we go through this webinar is you're going to see our Twitter handles and the hashtag. The Twitter handles for America's SBDC is at ASBDC, and then mine is at Jason Dorsey. The hashtag is SBDCGenStudy, GenStudy. Let's get ready and jump right in. So a little bit about me before we get started. I know many of you know me from speaking at your events, or you've seen me on TV or around the publicity associated with this study, but just to kind of get everybody on the same page. As you know, I study millennials and Generation Z. I'm a millennial myself. I'm also co-founder and president at the Center for Generational Kinetics. You may have seen me on bunches of TV shows, 60 Minutes, 2020, all kinds of other TV shows. In fact, this week alone, in support of the amazing findings from this study, we did 25 television shows, whoop, whoop, 25 new records, 6 radio shows, and a whole bunch of other coverage, including a great article in USA Today. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. So a little bit about me, this is what we do, passionate about it. And a little bit about our research center. We're the #1 generational millennial research and strategy firm in the world. So what we do every day is we study generations, and not just millennials. Sometimes people think it's only millennials, but that's not true. We study millennials, we study Gen Z who are younger, we also study Gen X and boomers. And the reason is, what we're looking for is a term we invented called generational context. We want to understand how the different generations interact with each other, and then what does that mean? How do I look across generations and even look into my own generation? That's where it starts to get really, really exciting. I know the slides, we have over 150 clients per year. This year, we'll have over 200 clients. And when we look at America's SBDC, this is particularly important because of the diversity of entrepreneurs and business owners that you guys serve. I mean, literally in a single day, walking into an SBDC, you could have somebody who has a dream of being a baker to somebody who owns a printing press. I mean, you guys see it all every single day. And we see the same thing, which is why we're such great partners on this project. And so our goal, our focus, our passion is how do we unlock the power of the generation? So how do we help different generations of entrepreneurs better unlock their talent? And really, in terms of America's SBDC, what are the things that you need to know in order to best engage across generations? And the reason we did this study is we wanted to see what were the similarities, what were the differences, what were kind of the hidden surprises between millennials as entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs relative to other generations in America. So really, really excited about what we found. And then we think about America's SBDC. Well, obviously, you guys know who you guys are. You're awesome. So America's SBDC, you guys, the association obviously represents the small business development centers. And like I said on television numerous times this week, you guys are the backbone of entrepreneurship in America. Literally any entrepreneur at any stage can go to their local SBDC and get the training, get the support, get the mentoring, get the tools and strategies and mindset they need to be successful. And, you know, as somebody who's owned their own business, I just want to thank you again for what you do. It is so incredibly important. You have so many people. I mean, just helping entrepreneurs in America obtain over $4.6 billion in capital last year. It's just amazing. Look at all the jobs you created. It's really, really remarkable what you do. So it's such an honor for myself and for our team here at the center to be your partners on this project and on this research study. So thank you again for what you do. All right, so what are we going to cover? All the good stuff you need to know. What is a generation? Make sure we're talking about the same thing there. Generations by birth years. So where do they start and stop? What are the key things to know about millennials now? I like to do that because sometimes what you've heard about millennials is not entirely true. And then we're going to jump right into the study and really look at everything that we found. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so what is a generation? Let's start there. So at the Center for Generational Kinetics, all we do is study generations. And one of the most important things that we learned is that people define generations differently. And that's very problematic, especially if you're trying to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and other influencers. And the reason is you're saying the word generation, you think one thing, I say the word generation, I think something else. So the way we define a generation at our center is it's a segment of a geographically linked population that experience similar social and cultural events at roughly the same time in their maturation, leading to predictability by scenario, which is a total mouthful and why we have lots of PhDs who work here. But another way to think about that, since I grew up on a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, is that generations are simply a group of people born about the same time, and this is the key, raised in about the same place. And see, that's so often overlooked, but so important to what America's SBDC does, because you will see dramatic differences by geography within the same generation between millennials who are from rural Texas, like where I grew up, versus millennials who are from Manhattan. So the key takeaway is this as we go into this larger conversation. Generations are not a box that each of us will fit neatly inside. You can't just tell me your birth year and then voila, I've got this great crystal ball. It doesn't work like that. But what generations are and how we're going to use them today, in this particular case, how to better understand the entrepreneurial mindset of millennials, is their generations are incredibly powerful clues on where to start to faster connect with and influence people of different ages. And that really is the magic behind them. That's the power. Because in order to be able to successfully help people, we have to be able to connect and influence. And generations gives us those clues that we need. And that's what we're all about studying here. And you'll see there's so many shocking findings from this national study. It's incredible. All right. So let's look at generations by birth year. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this particular area. If you want more details on the generations by birth year, you can visit our research center's website at genhq.com, genhq.com, and click on the tab to learn more about the different generations. And there's tons of information. But in the interest of time, we're just going to cover the birth years very quickly so that you can see where you fit, where other generations fit. And then we're going to move quickly into millennials and then the larger research. Okay, let's jump into the generations by birth year. First, we look at here is Generation Z. I speak a lot internationally, and they like to call them Generation Z. The Gen Z is born about 1996 and after. Here is the key dividing line. Now, listen closely to this because it's not what you've heard elsewhere. Lots of people say millennials go to 2000, and that's not true. The reason is the most important event that shaped the millennial generation was September the 11th, 2001. You know that. But here's the thing. You cannot be born after 1995 and process the significance of September the 11th, 2001. Your brain is simply too young. Another way to think about it is if you've always thought about 9/11 as history, if you don't remember it, but it's something you watched on YouTube, you are not a millennial, you are in Gen Z. And there's some dramatic differences between Gen Z and millennials. So millennials are born about 1977 to 1995. Now, sometimes you have a hard and fast line like we do in the 1995 to 1996, and other times you have a transition. So millennials could be born anywhere starting in 1977 all the way up to 1980. Anywhere kind of in that range, maybe even expanded by a few more years if you look at cuspers, who are people born on the edges of generations and tend to have characteristics of both. It's a real advantage because you empathize with both generations. So you have millennials born about 77 and 95. Then we have Generation X right before them. Then we have baby boomers born 1946 to 64. And a quick thing here, that's the generally accepted birth years of baby boomers. But at our research center, we believe that baby boomers are actually two different generations, older boomers and younger boomers, because older boomers had very different formative events than younger boomers, more of the civil rights type movements, man on the moon, you name all that, where younger boomers are actually more 70s kids. So some pretty big differences there. And then traditionalists, which would be my grandparents' generation, they're born about 1945 and before. And what I want you to notice here is America's SBDCs, for the first time, are now serving 4 and potentially even 5 generations at the same time, which makes understanding generational differences around entrepreneurship more important than ever before, and why we partnered with you guys to do this great national study, because we have to understand what's really going on by generation around entrepreneurship in America. And a study like this hasn't been done before, not in the way that we look at it. So it's really incredibly exciting. All right, let's jump in to meet the millennials. Just quick high level. This is my own generation. Whoop, whoop, millennials. Now, just to quickly clear something up, millennials can also be called Generation Y. It's the same exact generation. It just happens that in the US and mainly in North America, the term millennials is what's really caught on. In many other parts of the world, they still use the term Gen Y. Just know, same exact generation, different names. There's about 80 million millennials in the US. We're the most diverse generation in US history. Some of you saw my TEDx talk where I talked about how millennials and Gen Z look at diversity differently than other generations. It's caused quite a stir. And that we're the fastest growing generation of customers in the US. So if you think about us from a marketing and sales side, we're already the largest generation in the workforce. Everybody thinks we're unemployed, we're broke, and our pants are falling off. And the truth is, more of us are working than any other generation. And as you'll see when we get to the new data we uncovered around millennials as entrepreneurs, some really shocking stats around who's going to drive entrepreneurship in America, and it may not be who you think. So great little overview of millennials. We're older than most people think. We're the largest generation since boomers. Totally different view of diversity. We're driving sales, we're driving marketing, we're driving as employees. And when we get to the data, you'll see how we're impacting entrepreneurship. All right. Top 5 things to know about millennials now. Now, this is based on the Center for Generational Kinetics, our research around millennials across all these industries, tons and tons of different companies, lots and lots of different studies. This is just to give you some high-level strategy and perspective, really, around my generation, our generation. All right, here we go. Top 5 things to know. Number 1 thing to know about millennials from our research is that millennials are experiencing what we call delayed adulthood. Now, this term has been used for years, but it's taking on new connotations with millennials. So what that means is millennials are delaying many of the gateway markers to adulthood. We're delaying everything from entering the workforce, buying our own house, getting married, having kids, even finishing school. All of those things are shifting back. So you're getting this delayed adulthood where it's really moving back into a later age. And you may see the average age of marriage actually exceed the age of 30, which would send shockwaves throughout the United States. And underneath that, what we're also seeing is that this big generation, millennials, are actually splitting. They're breaking into 2 different generations. And so you have one generation doing everything we're told we're supposed to do, and then another part of the generation that's really struggling to get this real-world traction. And for those of you that saw my TEDx talk, you've heard me talk about this, that the generation that is most offended by millennials acting entitled at work are other millennials who do not feel entitled, because we think the rest of the generation is giving us a bad reputation. So you have this delayed adulthood life stage, and you have the generation splitting into really wild stuff there. You can see more about that online. Now, the other piece that I want to make sure we cover here is that everybody thinks millennials are tech savvy. In fact, the whole entrepreneurship world seems to think millennials are tech savvy. But what we discovered at our research center is that is not true. Millennials are not tech savvy. What we actually are, we are tech dependent. We don't know how technology works. We just know we cannot live without it, which is one of the many reasons that so many of us show up and say, please help us with QuickBooks. We can't figure it out, which is why y'all do such amazing training around that. Millennials are also, now that we're getting older, we're finally entering our wealth accumulation stage. We'll outspend every other generation starting this year. We have the least established loyalty as customers, most likely group to refer our friends. That includes referring people to entrepreneurship education. And we drive every major consumer and workforce trend, and we believe will soon drive every major entrepreneurship trend. So big generation driving all these trends. We have to know how they think about entrepreneurship in order to best engage them. So let's jump into that. Overview of the national study on America's voice on small business, where we really dug into looking at each generation. Here we go. So what was the study methodology? Well, what we did is the Center for Generational Kinetics, we worked very closely with America's SBDC. They have an amazing board, great people, awesome stakeholders. And we said, how do we understand the real mindset, this entrepreneurial mindset of Americans, specifically millennials compared to others? And then how do we understand, how do we engage them? How do we uncover their perceptions, their motivations, their behaviors when it comes to small business? We define small business in a specific way. And then we led the national quant study to just about 1,000 U.S. adults ages 21 to 65 weighted to the U.S. Census. And here's the key thing. I know a lot of you work at universities. The key thing is the margin of error for this study is plus or minus 3.1, 19 out of 20 times. And basically what that means is this is the gold standard for national studies. This is a true snapshot of America, basically as accurate as you can get. If we did 2,000 or 3,000, survey completes instead, the margin of error really wouldn't change that much. This is literally the gold standard, as good as it gets, and which is why we're so excited. I mean, nothing like this has ever been asked. These questions haven't been asked before, and what we found is really, really shocking and surprising. Okay, so now you know this is as good as it gets, the study that you need in order to understand the generation. All right, so what did we uncover? Let's jump into that. I want to walk through each of these slides with you. Of course, this is being recorded so that you can go and play it back if you want to dig into it a little bit more. What we found is that Americans have surprising small business experience and familiarity with small business. In fact, more than 1/3 of all Americans across generations have worked in a small business in the past. Huge! I wish you guys could have seen that on the TV shows when we talked about it. Really got people's attention. They had no idea. 27% of Americans have friends or family who own a small business. Wow. And this is my favorite. The national study found that millennials are more likely than other generations to currently work in a small business. So powerful. In fact, 24% of both millennials and Gen X owns or has owned a small business. Really great numbers, especially for the age of millennials. Really, really exciting. All right, let's keep going. The entrepreneurial mindset is alive and well in America, especially with millennials. And we bolded the data all throughout this because it really jumps out at you. 61% of millennials, this is a big one, the news anchors couldn't believe this. 61% of millennials say that there's more job security in owning your own business than in working for someone else. Now, I know many of you are going, really? Well, hold on there. You have to remember that millennials entered the workforce during the Great Recession. So they entered the workforce at a time of tremendous challenge with record-setting college debt, and since then have had to deal with wage stagnation. So if you put all that in context, plus their parents got laid off and everything else that they saw, many millennials, clearly, over 6 out of 10, believe that there's more job security in owning your own business. Now, this is really powerful, but let's start to break that down. In contrast, 64% of baby boomers think that there's greater job security in working for someone else. So boomers say, hire me, and millennials say, no, I want to hire myself. 38% of millennials have been a part of a new startup when it first began. 26% have lived entirely off the income from a business they started. And I love this. 62% of millennials have a dream business in mind that they would love to start, and close to half intend to start their own business in the next 3 years. Let's pause on that last one for a second. 62% of millennials have a dream business in mind that they would love to start, and almost half intend to start their own business in the next 3 years. Well, there's what we're looking for. That's the entrepreneurial mindset within the generation, saying, look, I see this as the most secure path. I have had lots of exposure to this, either working in it or knowing people, and I intend to start my own business within the next 3 years. Well, let's go deeper now. Now you start to see the story. It's really exciting. And if you haven't posted anything on Twitter, make sure you do that, at ASBDC, at Jason Dorsey, hashtag SBDCGenStudy. So entrepreneurialism, barriers and roadblocks. So what does this mean? What are the things that you believe are keeping you or holding you back from being an entrepreneur? Now, again, this is us asking them all across the country by generation. Here we go. This is so awesome. Money is the most limiting factor in entrepreneurship. 43% of Americans, this is across generations, cite money or access to money as the most important resource to starting a business. So this tops all of them. Access to capital is the real challenge. 55% of Americans rate accessing money as the most difficult aspect of starting a business. 63%, sometimes we want to look at it by gender, 63% of women say accessing money is the most difficult aspect of starting a business. That is really important to know. And this is much higher than men, who said that 45% of the time. And then 33% of Americans say not having money or financing is the number one reason keeping them from starting their own business. So clearly what we're seeing is that millennials want to own their own business. They're intentional about wanting to own their own business in the near future, but we see some barriers and across generations. What's next? The other barrier, lack of knowledge and small business savvy create additional barriers. So these are the things that are holding them back, in addition to access to capital, access to cash, because so that's what they said first. This is what they said second. More than 13 million millennials say the number one reason keeping them from starting a business is they don't know how to run a business. And then more than 13 million say the biggest barrier is not knowing where to go for help with starting that business. So this is really interesting. So what they're saying is that as a generation, we need to know where to go for help. We know we need to learn more, but we do want to own our own businesses. And that is incredibly exciting for millennials, for every generation, frankly, and for our country, since this is a national study. Okay, new business creation. What are the catalysts? Where's the untapped potential? What can we use? When we look at this enormous potential that we bring by Generation America, this to me is stunning. 41% of Americans, that's across generations, would quit their job and start a business in the next 6 months if they have the tools and resources they need. And that number jumps all the way up to 54% when it's millennials. So millennials are literally saying, we are the entrepreneur generation. And then 61% of Americans said they'd be encouraged to start a business if they knew where to go for help. But for millennials, pay close attention because this to me is key, 74% of millennials, so they'd be encouraged to start a small business if they knew where to go for help. So this is not the lazy generation. Everybody's saying, oh, they just want a business handed to them on a silver platter along with a ribbon. That's not what we're seeing in the data. What we're seeing them say is, I want to start my own business. I need to know where to go for help. And if I could figure out where to go for help, I would definitely move forward and do this. Wow. Imagine what that means for America's SBDC. I mean, you guys as SBDC, as Small Business Development Center leaders, if you are the right people in the right place at the right time, and this huge generation of 80 million is saying, we need to know where to go for help. So wonderful alignment there. In terms of the motivations behind it, 47% of Americans list the potential to make money as what would motivate them to most start their own business. 40% of Americans list the appeal of being their own boss as their motivation for starting a small business. 62% of Americans would rather have a business that makes a lot of money than a business that is a lot of fun. I love that. I love that. And this one concerns me. 65% of millennials would move to a different country if they knew their new business would be successful in that location. I would really like to keep millennial entrepreneurs here because we need more young adults and really everyone starting businesses that are successful. So let's work together to make that happen. All right. What are the conclusions and the recommendations? I know we've gone through this fast. There's so much content there. But what I want you to notice as you think about this is there's a very, very, very clear set of conclusions that come out of this that you can put to use immediately, individually and throughout your organization to really start to drive results to unlock the potential of the millennial generation. Let's talk about those. What did we conclude? A healthy view of small business and entrepreneurship exists in America today, meaning people are not necessarily negative about it. In fact, they're quite optimistic. Not only do many Americans already have experience with small business, whether they were an owner, an employee, or family member, but they also have a drive to create new small businesses, so they want to do it themselves. This is true for every generation in the national study, but this is what got me, particularly true for millennials, who more than any other group have dream businesses that they would love to start and have the intention of starting a small business in the near future. They're saying, I want to own my own small business and I want to start it in the near future. Now, we talked about what was holding them back, so we need to focus on what we can do to pull them forward. Americans believe that wealth can be created with small businesses, and there's some real clear barriers that they see that are standing in their way. Much of it centers around money or access to capital. And remember, we saw that consistently across all the generations, and we saw that access to capital was an even higher barrier, perceived barrier for women than it was for men. So we've got that going as well that we need to make sure that we're focusing on. So what can we do? So when we think about the recommendations, some of this stuff is just so in line with America's SBDC, it just gets me fired up. Americans clearly have a desire to create small businesses. We need to affirm and fan that flame and get them fired up and get them to take action. But what they need is a roadmap to make the path to starting a small business more discernible, easier to see and recognize and less overwhelming. So seeing this roadmap, knowing it exists, proves that it's achievable. So here's the bottom line. Millennials are saying, I want to start my own business. I definitely want to start my own business. I know I need more help, and I know I need to go somewhere for help, but I don't know where to go. So frequently what we talk about is you need to have a business plan, right? We got to start with a business plan. But what I want to say is the business plan is kind of part of a larger plan that we need in terms of actually thinking through, understanding, be able to start our own small business. So we have to look at it at even bigger picture to say, look, here is the journey to owning your own business. These are all the steps. And for those of you that heard me speak at the conference, we want to start with the end in mind. And the end in this particular case is owning a successful small business. Now, success may be different to different people. For some people, it's making a lot of money. For some people, it's getting to follow their passion, do what they get fired up and excited about. Usually, maybe it's a mix of both. So with millennials, we want to show them, hey, this is the end result of this bigger picture plan, and then work backwards one time back to where they are today, and then show them where we start is working on a business plan or going to the initial training that you guys offer. So we need to see how that end result that we want connects all the way back to where we are today. but it's got to be big picture, not just these incremental steps, because millennials don't think like that. The second is access to startup capital is critical. The bottom line is millennials in particular don't know how to access the capital that they need, and we know that's even higher, a higher barrier, perceived barrier to entry when it comes to women. So when we think about that, what does that mean? It means up front, we need to have clear, consistent training and conversations around the different ways to access capital. Now, what is interesting is that millennials look at accessing capital in lots of different ways. So it's not just going to, your local community bank and getting a loan. It could be crowdfunding. It can be all these different ways to access capital that maybe didn't even exist 10 years ago, that millennials are more open to, because to them that seems like the path to take. So when we have the conversation about accessing startup capital, keep in mind for many, many, many millennials, that's not putting together a loan package and going down to the local community bank, but it may take on 3, 4, 5 different looks, depending on which path that they want to consider and test out. And we've certainly seen that all throughout the country, whether that's crowdfunding or other different ways, even pre-selling what it is you need online and then going back and actually building that product or launching the business. We're also seeing that with the incubators. I know many of you are involved with that. Having a place to go that lowers the cost, all of that works, because it starts to change our relationship to the access to capital and not feel like there's only one option, that's to go to the bank, because that's not what millennials want to hear. We know there's more options. We want to have that conversation, and you guys are the experts at being able to lead that. The third one, support will go a long way. Here's the bottom line. Millennials need mentors and coaches as they go down this path of building their own business. And this is important. Historically, so much of entrepreneurship education out there has been in the form of trainings or classrooms, and that's really important. However, this is a generation that has gotten all of their information through YouTube videos, right? We ask Siri, and Siri tells us what the answer is. When it comes to actually implementing that, that's where many millennials fall down. And what we see works best is to have more of a coaching or mentoring relationship with them, where you have this cadence where every week or every 2 weeks you're taking ground and they're reporting back. Sometimes you're even seeing it daily. So the idea there is you want to help them see this as a launch all the way through, and that you're there to hold them accountable and cheer them on. Really, really, really important. It's much less kind of rigid than the traditional entrepreneurship education. And I know many of you, if not all of you, have already adapted to this new reality, and it's great to be able to reinforce that. We need that coaching, that mentoring relationship. That's what we're accustomed to spur us on, to drive us to continue to move forward, in spite of all the naysayers and everything else that we're going to hear as we go down this route. Then the fourth one, women are willing to be entrepreneurs. In fact, I would say even more so, they want to be entrepreneurs. And this is really important. My mom, owned her own business. And I remember, being there when nobody would make her a loan, and because she was a woman, and just all this awful stuff that we went through in our little town for her to start her own business. And it was tough. I mean, it was awful. And I was just off to the sidelines, as a teenager going through all that. So when we think about this, we want to make sure that we're really, really being aware and reaching out to women and really all diversity as we think about serving people, because we want to make sure and spread that, spread this entrepreneurial mindset, really fan the flame all across the country. And I know for my mom and being on the sidelines, like I said, when she finally was able to get that loan after everything that she went through, and then a few years later, she won Entrepreneur of the Year. I mean, it's just, we've got to get past some of these preconceived notions and really see people as entrepreneurs and not males and females and everything else. And I know you guys believe that, so I'm going to get off my soapbox now. And now where do we go from here? Well, we've made sure to finish on time. So here's what we're going to do. Rather than doing a Q&A or these kinds of things, I've put all of my contact details right here so you can reach out to me directly. Let me walk through those with you. First, make sure and use Twitter. If your SBDC isn't on Twitter, we definitely need to get on there. And if you're on Twitter, follow me and post your questions there. So it's @JasonDorsey. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I publish lots of how-to, lots of research. We're even talking about this study on our LinkedIn already. So make sure you go there, send me an invite so we can connect. We'll stay connected, and then we'll keep the conversation going. And you can see additional research on our website, which is genhq.com. Most importantly, download the entire study, which is the white paper and the infographics, which are awesome. You can get that at americassbdc.org/SBDCGenStudy. Now, that's a little bit tricky to spell because America's SBDC has 2 S's in the middle, and then Gen is GEN. So Go to americassbdc.org/SBDCGenStudy and download all that. And then on your own SBDC website, make sure you link back to that page so more people see the results from this and we have a bigger conversation. And then if you have specific questions that you want to get answered, whether that's for media inquiries, you want to do press releases, you want to be able to take this content and share it with all of your customers and those you serve, put it in your newsletters. Like, we need to get the word out there that millennials are this much more entrepreneurial generation than people think, and that America's SBDCs have all kinds of free resources to help them. Email April, she's outstanding, her email is marketing@americassbdc.org. And then, of course, visit the website and use the hashtag if you post online, hashtag SBDCGenStudy. And here's the most important thing from my kind of viewpoint. You know, as the millennial entrepreneur, I started my company when I was 18 years old, and everybody literally laughed at me. I mean, I remember I slept on the floor of this really small garage apartment that backed up to an alley for 2 years. I mean, literally on the floor, because I wanted to be an entrepreneur and help people, and that was my big thing. And it's an incredibly lonely journey, oftentimes as an entrepreneur, to start a business, and even more so sometimes when you're young and you don't have anybody to go to. What you guys do is so incredibly important, and so often no one says to you thank you. So I want to say to you, thank you so very much for what you do. We are incredibly grateful. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate you.